Hi everyone, today we'll be going over accounts, May June 2022, paper 2 question number 4. This is structured paper 2, which consists 4 questions, 2 of 30 marks and 2 of 15 marks, and we are also given a time limit of 1 hour 30 minutes. And since question number 4 is of 30 marks, we will be attempting to solve this question under 30 minutes. Now, without any further delay, let's get started. F Limited is a manufacturing company which uses absorption costing at one of its factories, and this factory has 2 production departments and 2 service departments. Then budgeted costs have already been allocated and apportioned. For the first part of this question, we need to explain the meaning of each of the following terms. The first one is allocation. Whenever we allocate overheads, those overhead expenses are directly attributed to a specific cost center, meaning that those expenses are directly related to that particular cost center. Let's write it down. Overheads expenses are directly attributed to a specific cost center. Then the second one is apportionment. So whenever we apportion the overheads, it means that those overheads are shared between different departments on a suitable basis. Let's write it down. Overheads expenses are shared between different departments by using a suitable basis. So we can understand this by remembering that allocation always relates to the direct costs attributed to the specific cost center, whereas apportionment means the indirect costs are shared between the cost centers or different departments by using a suitable basis. Okay, so this concludes the first part of this question. Now we can move towards the second one. We need to state one benefit of using absorption costing. So the very major benefit of using absorption costing is that it is useful for determining a selling price. Let's write it down. Useful for determining a selling price. Alright, this concludes the second part. Now we can move towards the third one. For the third question, we need to state one limitation of using absorption costing. So absorption costing is not very useful for short-term decision making, and that would be our limitation. Let's write it down. Not useful for short-term decision making. Alright, this concludes the third part of this question. Now we can move towards the fourth one. We are given additional information. So first of all, let's have a look at our question. For the first part of this question, we need to calculate the total overheads for each production department by reapportioning. So we're talking about apportionment here, meaning that we are sharing the overhead expenses among different departments on a suitable basis. The service department overheads, and we know that we have 2 service departments. The first one is stores department and the second one is maintenance department. Now we just need to reapportion these expenses of 19,200 relating to the stores department and 26,700 relating to the maintenance departments to our production departments of assembly and finishing. Okay, now we know that we reapportion on our suitable basis. So let's have a look above in our information section. The service department overheads are apportioned to the production departments on the following basis. So if you're apportioning the maintenance, then 60% of the maintenance goes towards assembly department, 30% goes towards finishing department, and 10% goes towards the stores department. Okay, so let's work towards reapportioning the maintenance. We can write our heading as maintenance. Okay, and we can see that our total maintenance overhead is 26,700. And we already have our apportionment basis right here. 60% goes towards the assembly department. Let's figure that one out. So that's the total of 26,700 times 60%, which we can write down as 0.60. So this gives the reapportionment of maintenance department to our assembly department to be 26,700 times 0.60, which results in the value of 16,020. Let's write it down in our table. Now we can move towards finding the same for finishing department. We can see that 30% of the total of maintenance department is apportioned towards our finishing department. So that's the total of 26,700 times 30%, which we can write down as 0.30. So this gives the reapportionment of maintenance department towards the finishing department to be 26,700 times 0.30, which results in the value of 8,010. Let's write it down in our table. Now we repeat the same process for stores department. We can see that 10% of the maintenance department is apportioned towards stores department. So that's going to be the total of 26,700 times 10%, which we can write down as 0.10. So this gives the apportionment of maintenance department towards the stores department to be 26,700 times 0.10, which results in the value of 2,670. Let's write it down in our table. And since we are apportioning this amount, we also need to subtract this amount from the maintenance department now. So that's 26,700, but in a bracket indicating that this needs to be subtracted. Alright, now we can move towards figuring the subtotal. Subtotal is just going to be the sum of total overhead costs and the maintenance apportionment. So for assembly department, that's going to be 275,000 plus 16,020, which results in the value of 291,020. For finishing departments, that's going to be 103,200 plus 8,010, which results in the value of 111,210. For the stores department, that's going to be 19,200 plus 2,670, which results in the value of 21,870. And for maintenance department, that's 26,700 minus 26,700, which results in the value of 0. Okay. Now we move towards reapportioning our stores department. So we can write the heading as stores. And the basis for reapportionment is just that 75% of the total of stores department will go towards assembly department and 25% will go towards the finishing department. Okay, so we can see that the total of the stores department is 21,870, right? So let's figure out 75% of that for assembly department. That's just 21,870 times 75%, which we can write down as 0.75. So this results in the reapportionment of stores department towards assembly department to be 21,870 times 0.75, which results in the value of 16,402.5. We can round it off. So this goes to 16,403. Let's write it down in our table. Now we move towards reapportioning the stores department towards the finishing department, and that's 25% of the total, right? And our total is 21,870, so we can just multiply it with 25%, which we can write down as 0.25, and this results in the value of the reapportionment of stores department in the finishing department to be 21,870 times 0.25, which results in the value of 5,467.5. Okay, we can see that both of these values have 0.5 and we rounded it up by 1 digit, but we can't round it up by 1 digit, otherwise the total of these two amounts will be 1 greater than the total of 21,870. So we have to round it off to a number less than this value. So that's going to be 5,467 only. And the sum of these two amounts, 16,403 and 5,467, will result in the total of 21,870. So let's write our reapportioned amount of 5,467 in our finishing department. So that's 5,467. Okay, now we can move towards figuring out the total. Now the total is just going to be the sum of subtotal and the stores reapportionment. Now for assembly department, that's going to be 291,020 plus 16,403, which results in the total of 307,423. Then for finishing department, that's going to be 111,210 plus 5,467, which results in the total of 116,677. So since we reapportion the value of the total for storage departments in our production departments, we need to subtract the same amount. So that's 21,870 in a bracket, indicating that this needs to be subtracted. Now this gives the total for the storage department to be 21,870 minus 21,870, which results in 0. Okay, so this concludes the fourth part of this question. Now we can move towards the fifth one. We are given additional information. The following additional monthly budgeted information is available about the production departments. So we can see that the labor hour for assembly department and finishing department are 950 and 840 respectively, whereas the machine hours for assembly and finishing department are 1430 and 380 respectively. Now for the fifth part of this question, we need to calculate the overhead absorption rate for each department to 2 decimal places. Okay, for assembly department, we figured out our total overhead above, and that was 307,423. Let's write it down. That's 307,423. Now we need to divide it with our hours. So we have 2 hours, right? The first one is labor hour and the second one is machine hour. So whenever we're trying to figure out the overhead absorption rate, we look at the higher of these 2 hours. So in case of assembly department, we can see that the labor hour is 950, whereas the machine hour is 1430. We can see that the higher one is definitely machine hours, so we will be using machine hours to divide our total overhead in order to figure out our overhead absorption rate. So we can divide it with the total machine hour of 1430. Now this gives the overhead absorption rate for assembly department to be 307,423 divided by 1,430, which results in the value of 214.98. And this is the overhead absorption rate. Since we divided it with our machine hours, this overhead absorption rate will be per machine hour. So we need to write that down as well. Alright, now we need to figure out the same for finishing department. Let's have a look at the total of the finishing department above. We figured it out to be 116,677. Let's write it down. That's 116,677. And now we need to divide it with our hours. Since we can see that there are 2 hours, again we look at the higher one. For finishing department, the labor hour is 840, whereas the machine hour is 380. Clearly, the labor hour is higher one, which means that we will be dividing our total overheads with the labor hours. So that's 840. Now this gives our overhead absorption rate for finishing department to be 116,677 divided by 840, which results in the value of 138.90. And since we divided it with our labor hours, this overhead absorption rate will be per labor hour. We need to write that down as well. Alright, this concludes the fifth part of this question. Now we can move towards the sixth one. Again, we are given additional information. In April 2022, the production was less than the forecast figure, and the assembly department's actual overheads were 285,400. Actual labor hours were 820 and actual machine hours were 1,310. Now we need to figure out the underabsorption or overabsorption. What we know is that the actual overhead for assembly department was 285,400. Now in order to figure out whether there was underabsorption or overabsorption, we need to figure out our budgeted overhead as well. And whenever we're comparing for underabsorption or overabsorption, we need to have the same basis. So let's have a look above. We can see that the overhead absorption rate for assembly department depended upon the machine hour, right? So let's have a look at the machine hours. We can see that the actual machine hours were 1,310. And this actual overhead is based on the machine hour of 1,310, meaning that our budgeted overhead should also be based on that particular machine hours. So that's 1,310. And we can just multiply it with our overhead absorption rate. So the overhead absorption rate for assembly department was 214.98. Let's multiply it. That's 214.98. Okay, this gives our budgeted overhead to be 1,310 times 214.98, which results in the value of 281,623.8. So we can clearly see that the actual overhead is greater than the budgeted overhead, right? So this means that this is a case of underabsorption. And the amount underabsorbed will just be the difference between the actual overhead and the budgeted overhead. So that's going to be actual overhead of 285,400 minus the budgeted overhead of 281,623.8. So this gives our underabsorption to be 285,400 minus 281,623.80, which results in the value of 3,776.2. This concludes the sixth part of this question. Now we can move towards the seventh one. We are again given additional information. First of all, let's have a look at our question. So for the seventh part of this question, we need to calculate the profit to be made in May 2022 for each of the option A and option B. Alright, let's have a look at our additional information. We are given that at another factory, the company manufactures two products, and the factory uses marginal costing, and the following details are available. So we're given the direct materials per unit, direct labor per unit, fixed cost per unit, and selling price per unit, as well as the normal production per units. Okay, we can see that the fixed cost is given per unit, and these relate to these particular units, meaning that any additional units or any units reduced will not affect our total fixed costs. So first of all, let's figure out our total fixed costs for both product X and product Z. So for X, we have the fixed cost per unit of 5, and then we can multiply it with the total units of 8,000. So that's 5 times 8,000, which gives our total fixed cost for product X to be 40,000. Then for Z, we are given the fixed cost per unit of 6. We multiply it with our total units of 4,000. And this gives the total fixed cost for Z to be 24,000. Alright, then the company has a major customer who usually orders 5,000 units of product X. Okay, and this order is included in the normal production of 8,000 units per month. So out of 8,000, we also include the 5,000 units that is being purchased by a major customer. Then in May 2022, the customer has asked for 9,000 units of product X. So instead of the usual 5,000 units, now the customer has asked for 9,000 units. Then if it is not possible to supply this quantity, the customer has informed the directors that they will place their entire order and all future orders with another company. Okay, now the directors are considering two options. Let's have a look at our first option, option A. Stop manufacture of product Z and devote all labor hours to the production of product X. So if we're talking about option A, we do not have to include the production of product Z, so you can completely overlook all of the costs except for the fixed cost, because the fixed cost will be incurred no matter the production units, right? So we just completely ignore this except for our fixed cost relating to product Z. Okay, then the company is able to complete all the normal orders for product X and the increased order from the customer. So we know that our usual units were 8,000, which included the 5,000 order of that major customer. And for the month of May 2022, the customer has asked for 9,000. So if we have already included 5,000 out of the 9,000, then the increased units is just going to be 9,000 minus 5,000, which is 4,000. So 4,000 additional units we have to produce. So that's 8,000 plus 4,000, which results in the total units produced to be 12,000 for May 2022. Then the workforce for product Z will require some retraining, costing 3,000. So this is training cost, which needs to be added to our fixed cost. Let's figure out the total fixed cost for option A. So this will include the fixed cost for product X, which we figured out to be 40,000 right here. And this will also include the fixed cost related to product Z, which resulted in 24,000, because no matter the production units, the fixed cost will still be incurred. So that's 40,000 plus 24,000, 40,000 plus 24,000, and we have an additional retraining cost of 3,000, which is again a fixed cost, so that's plus 3,000. So our total fixed cost is going to be 40,000 plus 24,000 plus 3,000, which results in the value of 67,000. This is the total fixed cost. Now, since we have our total number of units that we're producing, we can start with our total contribution, right? For that, we require our contribution per unit, and the contribution per unit is just going to be the sales price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. So let's have a look at the above information. We can see that the selling price per unit for product X is 24. And now we need to subtract the variable costs, which is the direct materials per unit and direct labor per unit, which are 6 and 9 respectively. So let's subtract that. Minus 6 minus 9. This gives our contribution per unit to be 24 minus 6 minus 9, which results in $9. Okay, so in order to figure out the profit from option A, we will be starting with our total contribution. So total contribution let's have a look above. We can see that our contribution per unit is 9 and the total number of units that we are producing is 12,000. So total contribution would just be the product of these two numbers. So that's 12,000 times 9. This gives our total contribution to be 108,000. Now we can subtract our fixed cost in order to figure out the profit. So let's have a look above. We can see that our fixed cost, we calculated it to be 67,000. Let's subtract it. That's 67,000. And this is in a bracket to indicate that this needs to be subtracted. Now, if we subtract the fixed cost from our total contribution, we can easily figure out the profit for May 2022. So that's going to be 108,000 minus 67,000, which results in the value of 41,000. Okay, so this concludes the profit for option A. Now we move towards figuring out the profit for option B. So let's have a look at our option B. We need to maintain normal production levels. So we were given above the normal production level for product X is 8,000 units, and for product Z, that's 4,000 units. Okay, and we refuse the customer's order, meaning that we stick to our normal level of production of 8,000 for product X and 4,000 for product Z. Then we also reduce the selling price of product X by 5% in order to enable all normal production of this unit to be sold. So in order to figure out the new selling price for product X, we just need to reduce our existing selling price by 5%. We can see above that our existing selling price per unit was 24. So now we will be reducing it with 5%. So that's going to be 24 times 1 minus 5%. Since we're reducing it, we can write our 5% as 0.05. This gives the new selling price for product X to be 24 times 1 minus 0.05, which results in the value of 22.8. Okay, so now we can move towards figuring out our profit for option B by figuring out the profit for both product X and product Z. We will be starting with the contribution. Have a look above. For product X, we figured out our new selling price to be 22.8. So let's figure out our new contribution. That's just going to be selling price minus the variable cost, and we have the selling price of 22.8. We need to subtract all of our variable costs relating to product X, which is the direct materials per unit of 6 and direct labor per unit of 9. Let's subtract this. So that's 6 minus 9. This gives our contribution per unit to be 22.8 minus 6 minus 9, which results in the value of 7.8. Now the total contribution is just going to be contribution per unit times our number of units produced. And we know that we are sticking to our normal production per unit, which is 8,000 for product X. So our total contribution is going to be 8,000 times the contribution per unit of 7.8. This gives our total contribution to be 62,400. Let's write it down. So that's 62,400 Now we repeat the same process for product Z. So we have our selling price of 30 right here for product Z. Then the contribution per unit is going to be selling price minus the variable cost. And the variable costs are direct materials of 9 and direct labor per unit of 9. So that's 30 minus 9, which results in our contribution per unit to be 12. Now the total contribution is just the contribution per unit times the production units, which is 4,000 for product Z. So that's 4,000 times contribution per unit of 12, which results in the total contribution to be 48,000. Let's write it down in our statement. So that's 48,000. Now we just need to subtract the fixed costs. Let's have a look above. The fixed costs remain unchanged, and we already figured out our fixed cost for product X to be 40,000 and product Z to be 24,000. So we can just substitute these two amounts. That's 40,000 for X and 24,000 for Z. And since we're subtracting the fixed cost, we need to write it down in a bracket, indicating that this needs to be subtracted. Now we can easily figure out our profit by subtracting the fixed cost from the contribution. For product X, that's going to be 62,400 minus 40,000, which results in the value of 22,400. For product Z, that's going to be 48,000 minus 24,000, which results in the value of 24,000. Now we figure out the profit for May 2022. That's going to be the sum of these two profits. So that's 22,400 for X plus 24,000 for Z. And this gives the total profit for May 2022 to be 22,400 plus 24,000, which results in the value of 46,400. Okay, so this concludes the 7th part of this question. Now we can move towards the 8th one. We now need to advise the directors which option they should choose. We need to justify our answer by discussing both financial as well as non-financial factors. Okay, the only financial factor here would be the profit, and we can see that the profit for option A is 41,000, whereas the profit for option B is 46,400. So we can clearly say that option B produces more profit than option A. Let's write it down. Option B produces more profit than option A. And in option B, we are catering to the needs of our major customer. We are also providing the total of 9,000 units ordered by that particular customer, right? So this will obviously ensure that the major customer will continue to order in the future. Let's write it down. Option A will ensure major customer will continue to order in the future. But in option B, we are completely ignoring the needs of that particular major customer. We are not providing 9,000 units for that customer, right? So that will obviously put us in a risk of losing a regular customer. So let's write it down. Option B gives rise to the risk of losing a regular customer. All right. Then we also know that for option A, we are completely neglecting product Z. We are not producing it anymore, right? So we do not know how customers will react for product Z. Let's write it down. For option A, we are not producing product Z, which might lead to future orders being lost. Okay, then for option B, we are obviously producing product Z, as well as we are producing the regular or normal units of 8,000 without catering 5,000 units to our major customer, which means that this will enable orders of other regular customers to be met. Let's write it down. Option B enables orders of other regular customers to be met. And for option B, we know that we are reducing the selling price for product X so that our sales level of product X will be increased. But we do not know whether the price cut actually produces the required level of sales of product X now and in the future, since we are losing our major customer who places 5,000 units of order every month forever, right? So we can write it down as well. For option B, will the price cut actually produce the required level of sales of product X now and in the future? Alright, so considering all these factors that we just listed down, now we have to make a decision and advise the directors which option they should choose. So personally, I would go with option A. So let's write that decision down clearly. The decision would be that the directors should choose option A. Okay, so this concludes the 8th part of this question as well as this entire question. If you found this video useful, make sure you like the video and leave a comment below. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you do not miss any of these videos in the future. Thank you.